1889, there was no northern and eastern province as in present form. Before 1873, even Anuradhapura, where I live and my university located, was belonged to the northern province. So the maximum history which this Tamil homeland has is about 150 years. It not goes beyond 1889. According to the latest census records, as Dr. Hettiaraji said, more than 50% of the Tamil people in Sri Lanka live outside northern and eastern provinces. The fact that there are no injustices to the Tamil-speaking people could be seen from the demand of the Tamil races to establish a separate country only in the northern and eastern provinces, ignoring the Tamil-speaking people living in the other provinces of the country. If there is an injustice to the Tamil people in the country, so what about the more than half of the Tamils live outside the northern and eastern province of the country? So it was the LTTE which in 1990 had ordered the Muslims to vacate the Jaffna Peninsula within 48 hours, and LTTE had massacred around hundreds of Muslims. The racial movement is continued. This is the important thing. The people are asking, why are you speaking, why are you talking about the history? Because this separatist movement, terrorist movement, this ideology is continues. The racial movement is continued by the current rulers of the Northern Provincial Council. So see, these pictures taken last week. The person here in the middle of picture is Sridharan, the Vanni district MP Member of Parliament for Tamil National Alliance. See what they are doing. You can see they are destroying something. An archaeological site in Kilinochchi belonging to the Sinhalese Buddhist, destroyed by using heavy machineries. Certain members of Parliament and members of Northern Provincial Council have been engaged in destroying Buddhist archaeological sites using bulldozers and heavy equipment. Not in 1970s, not in 1980s. Last week, some of these artifacts are over 2 millennia old, and these destructive actions are aimed at removing all Buddhist artifacts and proof of ancient Sinhalese Buddhist civilization in these areas to establish Tamil tiger lobbies, species of the Tamil homeland that never existed on Sri Lankan soil. So it is very important to break down the mythical history and study the history and to see whether there's a Tamil homeland in the northern and eastern province of the Sri Lanka. It's a myth. These destructive practices can be compared to blowing up of the magnificent standing Buddha statues at Bamiyan Valley, Afghanistan by Taliban. So we have seen many declarations by Tamil racists ignoring the proper history and the demography of the region and the Sri Lanka. So here in Geneva, 21st day of the September 2018, as World Patriotic Lankan Forum, we declare Geneva Declaration by World Patriotic Lankan Forum with 4 facts. There is no Tamil homeland in Sri Lanka. There are no injustices to the Tamil people in Sri Lanka just because they are Tamils based on their ethnicity. Sinhalese, Muslim and Muhudvadi people, they are indigenous people along eastern coast, and their cultural identity in northern and eastern province of Sri Lanka should be protected. It is threatened by racist Tamil politicians. Every kind of systematic discrimination against Sinhala people. Sinhalese people are the minority in the South Asian region, composed just 15 million. Sinhala nation, culture, language, heritage by majority of Tamils. They are the majority, 70 million people in the South Asian region, and Western nations should be stopped. So these are the declaration by World Patriotic Forum. So studying proper history shows there's no Tamil homeland in the northern and eastern province of the Sri Lanka. And the armed struggle, terrorist movement, is not a liberation struggle. It is based on mythical facts, mythical history. In any sense, it is not justifiable. So we have break down the mythical history. We have given academic answer to the history created by the racist scholars. So there's no point of talking the Tamil homeland further and struggle for that. They may have their homeland in the Tamil Nadu in India, but not in Sri Lanka. So let all Sri Lankans to live harmony together in Sri Lankan soil, and please do not disturb to this harmony. We are requesting from the all racist outfits around the world and also from the Western nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jabsana, for the great presentation. Now I would like to make the way to Rear Admiral Sarat Viyasekara.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's hardly any time for me. Maybe within 5 or 6 minutes I will finish this. You know that 30/1 resolution against Sri Lanka was based on the OICL report of the UNHRC High Commissioner. The purpose of the OICL report is to make a case of war crimes against the state. One of the charges was that during the last phase of war, the government pursued a policy of deliberately denying humanitarian assistance to the civilians trapped in the conflict zone. This forum should be informed that in order to provide assistance to the civilians, the government had established the CCHA, Consultative Committee on Humanitarian Assistance. And this committee comprised of government officials, including the Secretary of Defense, the secretaries of all relevant ministries, and non-government representatives, including Ambassador to the USA, the head of delegation of the European Commission, the ICRC officials, the World Food Programme, the country representative of the UNICEF, the World Health Organization, etc. This means the international community had access to the highest government officials responsible for providing humanitarian assistance to the conflict zone. But the OISL panel never consulted those people or the reports of CCHA before making their conclusion in this regard. The UN humanitarian coordinator who was in Sri Lanka at the same time was Mr. Neil Boone. We have minutes of CCHA meeting stating that Mr. Boone has applauded the good work done through the government agent structures in delivery, relief and assistance to IDP in such circumstances, and noted that they should be given a gold medal for the work done. Mr. Amin Awad, the representative of the UNHCR, has expressed the view that Sri Lanka was a role model for the entire world. And he says that government of Sri Lanka was always mindful of the fact that the civilian population in the Wani were citizens of Sri Lanka with equal rights to protection and security. Mrs. Imelda Sukumar was the district secretary to Mullatiu, the Jaffna area, and the documentation produced before the committee by Mrs. Sukumar makes it quite clear that there were buffer stocks under the World Food Programme to last for 3 months. She has ensured that at least 1 month's stock was available at any one time. She flatly denied the charges that provided records of food dispatch and stated that there was always a surplus available in reserve. They sold and yes. And also they said about the rules adopted by LTTE in siphoning the food stocks from the multi-cooperative society. Now the OICL report, if the panel had interviewed persons such as Mr. Kumar, Mr. Boone, Mr. Awad, the ICRC officials as witnesses, the panel could have asked them directly about the truth of this allegation. Answer to such question will no doubt have been useful to the panel in assessing whether the government pursued a policy of trying to starve the civilians. The panel never took that step, but yet the panel has seen it fit to pronounce unequivocally that the government followed the deliberate policy of depriving civilians on the conflict zone of humanitarian assistance. It shows how biased the OISL report has been in this regard. We never expected the world's highest institution established to protect the human rights of the people to accept such a report which is full of obfuscations and lies. Having said that, let me inform that this assembly that what we had in our country was a non-international armed conflict. It was not a fight against a group of insurgents. The LTTE had a uniformed cadre, a somewhat conventional army with sophisticated weapons, and also with naval and air force wings. They had a good command and control system. They exercised control over part of its territory and was able to carry out continuous and intensive military operations. The Darusman report and OIC report too has confirmed that what we had in our country was a non-international armed conflict. According to Common Article 3 and Additional Protocol 2 of Geneva Convention, the applicable law in a non-international armed conflict is international humanitarian law and not the international human rights law. In international humanitarian law, it is the responsibility of each party to the conflict to look after the civilians in their part of territory. In that case, in actual fact, the government forces had no obligation to provide assistance to civilians in LTTE controlled area, but yet she did. The LTTE, on the other hand, had robbed the food sent to the civilians in their control, and knowing all these, the OISL contemptuously charges us for deliberately denying supplies to the conflict area. It is a pity that the very authorities who are opposed to the implementation of the convention seems to be clueless of their own rules and regulations. The Article 4.3 of Protocol 2 also says, in order to protect the civilian population from hostilities, civilians are not to be harmed if they are not taking part in attacks or war activities or preparing attacks. In that situation, we are the Human Rights Council. Were the Muslim prayers at the Kartankudi Mosque preparing for an attack when the LTTE car entered the mosque and brutally massacred the innocents? Were the innocent novice Buddhist monks who were on a religious tour preparing an attack on LTTE when the LTTE stopped the bus, entered and chopped them to death? Were the unarmed civilians and Buddhist priests who were in a religious ceremony planning an attack on LTTE when the terrorists entered the area in Anuradhapura to engage in wholesale massacre? The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia concluded in an important decision that horrific crimes committed in an international armed conflict are to be considered international war crimes. It is very unfortunate to observe that the OISL panel, who considered it fit to charge the Sri Lankan troops who protected the human rights of all citizens with war crimes, were dead silent about the atrocities committed by the LTTE against humanity. They purposely ignored the true facts and propagate that we deliberately denied assistance to civilians. We supplied the necessary items knowing that most of it went to the hands of LTTE, but as we have proved beyond a reasonable doubt, we were the only force in the world who fed the enemy, fought the enemy, and sent medicine to treat the enemy when they got injured. Isn't that funny?
Thank you so much, Admiral Sarath Veerasekara, and we want to hear more from you, obviously, but time doesn't permit us. Now I would like to open the table for a couple of questions, please, if you do have from the audience. Do you have anything to say, please?
No, I just on a point of detail. At the time of the work of the OISL, Mr. Neil Buney was one of the directors of the UNDP office here. He was obviously interviewed many times, and I know him personally, been a friend for many years, and I know that he completely endorsed the findings and recommendations of the OISL report. I would be interested, therefore, to know whether you sought his views before making a statement that he was not interviewed.
Yeah, but if you want, I can produce the minutes of the CCHA, Consultative Committee on Humanitarian Assistance, which we on the last year March on a rebuttal, right, refusing all the charges, and we sent that documentation to the Secretary of the UNHRC, and Minister Neil Boone has very clearly said that the manner in which the humanitarian assistance was provided to the one area, conflict area, to the civilians in a war of this magnitude, and when considering that, the government staff and the forces should be given a gold medal. And Mr. Amin Awad has said we are role model for the entire world. And Mrs. Imelda Sukumar in the GA of the Multi in Jaffna area said that we at any one time we have a 3-month stock, but still you are charged of deliberately denying humanitarian aid to the one area. So I don't know how you say that Mr. Neil Boone has endorsed the OISL report, which I am a doubt.
Well, he certainly did.
But he has said like that.
As he fully endorsed.
He has said like that. I have got the proof. I have got the minute sheet.
Sorry. He also fully endorsed the Petrie report and the Deverstrand reports. You should know that. Unfortunately, Mr. Neil Buhner is still a very senior UN official and is therefore not in a position to make a public statement. However, several of the people who worked with Mr. Neil Buhner felt so strongly about this matter that they have resigned from the United Nations, and they have not only spoken, they have written about this, and you know the names as well as I do. But there seems to be a real problem in getting to the facts, and this is the reason why the Human Rights Council has called for mechanisms to Sri Lankan mechanisms, independent Sri Lankan mechanisms, to undertake a full independent investigation of the allegations of war crimes committed by both sides in the closing phase of the conflict, the armed conflict. I really would wish that we could get to that, because what we all need is clarity on the past in order to move together to the future about which the host of this
No,
meeting.
Mr. Miller, I don't think it's required because the six international experts on war crimes, the expert on international humanitarian law, Mr. Desmond Silva, Professor Desmond Silva, Professor Sir Jeffrey Nice, Professor Michael Crane, and Major General John Holmes and Rodney Dixon, they have all said very categorically, clearly, that war crimes, systematic war crimes, have not occurred in any part of the one area. So how are you telling that we have committed war crimes? You see, yeah, we have that. What we had in our country, as I said before, was a non-international armed conflict, and LTTE sued to say a non-state actor who fought with us, and there the applicable law is international humanitarian law. There, even a civilian who has provided a cup of tea to a bunker, not a civilian but is a combatant. Combatant can be killed in the war, you see, and all these collateral damages, Major General John Holmes are very clear, I said, within the limits of the acceptable figure, you see. So with all these things, why are you hopping on these war crimes charges on us?
Actually.
And all these 7 charges, violation of IHR, we have very clearly, categorically stated that we have said that we have not done that, and it was done by a group of intellectuals in Sri Lanka, not just another people, you see. So therefore, it is, I think, the systematic campaign against the Sri Lankan forces funded by separatist Tamil diaspora. So that is what happened.
And Dr. Chand, would
Yeah,
you like to add
if these
something?
experts are clearly mentioned there's no war crime in Sri Lanka, why are you continuously demanding for another inquiry, external inquiry?
The positions of all those particular groups that you have mentioned are completely the opposite of the positions of the people consulted, and they're equally eminent people, by the United Nations in establishing its report. There are legal opinions and there are legal opinions. They are clearly not in sync. They are not in agreement. Which is why, rather than declaring that one side or the other has the absolute truth, we need to have another investigation to establish facts and to establish the official linkages. That's what we
Mr.
are
Will,
If
don't
one-
you think,
can I-
just
may I-
one minute. Mr. Will, don't you think it's funny, it's fishy, something fishy, because this Ban Ki-moon was the Secretary to the UN. He came just after 3 days of the conclusion of the war. But when the LTTE was recruiting 3,000 child soldiers and using as cannon fodder, he never came here. When the LTTE was using 295,000 people as a human shield, he never came here. But he came here, he came to Sri Lanka just after 3 days to teach us about accountability. So don't you think that there's something fishy about it, you see?
I would like to remind you that in 2005, the former Secretary Kofi Annan, who's, in my view, mourning today, or celebrating in a way in an African tradition today, visited Sri Lanka immediately in the aftermath of the tsunami. He left very quickly because the Sri Lankan government did not authorize him to visit parts of the island where Tamils have been affected by the tsunami. This is the reality. That is the reason why the Secretary Generals from then onward did not come back to Sri Lanka unless they could visit the whole island.
Can I interject?
I can send you the newspaper article.
Could you just, may I?
And
please?
I would sincerely request that you
Okay,
do
I'd
not.
like to.
Kofi Annan was a very dear friend of mine.
Yeah.
May I-
Dr.
And I
Wanda,
would request
please.
that you do not in any way question this, because I can send you the articles, the letters from the then resident coordinator, predecessor of the
So let me interject with all due respect, please. I want to highlight 3 issues. So first of all, there is no something called truly independent investigation anywhere in the world. It's always biased one way or another. Number 2, would any of these ad hoc or witnesses to any of these atrocities, the alleged allegations to the Sri Lankan military, be prepared to take a independent polygraph test? That's what I'd like to find out, because there is no other way of verifying the authenticity of the allegations without a lie detector test to be admissible, legally admissible to a massive international investigation is ludicrous without a polygraphic test. Number three is that you should remember how the Tamil Tigers recruited. In my presentation yesterday, I highlighted that how the tsunami child victims were forcefully taken away by the Tamil Tigers to be recruited into the child brigade. So you should investigate that. These are the violations of Tamil Tigers rather than pointing the gun at the other side. So I urge that United Nations investigate this matter, because the numbers are there. There are UN reports that are depicted how this was done by the United. This is not something I'm telling you. These were our own UN reports how LTTE recruited tsunami victimized children from the camps. Unfortunately, I have to run for my presentation upstairs, but I'm going to take the microphone the others to take on. Please,
Mr. David, if the tsunami, if this claim is true, do you believe that Kofi Annan was willing to talk about the brutal activity of LTTE if the government of Sri Lanka allowed him to go there?
One of the things that was mentioned at the commemoration of Kofi Annan today was his initiative on establishing the post of special representative, special advisor to the Secretary General on children in armed conflict. As you know, that position was held by a prominent Sri Lankan, Ms. Radhika Kumaraswamy. And her reports on this subject were among those that you are rightly quoting. This is the, yes.
During that time, the so-called peace process governed by the Norwegian government was inactive, and the President Chandrika Kumaratunga was the President of Sri Lanka during that time, isn't it?
At the time when Chandrika Kumaratunga was the President of Sri Lanka, yes.
Yes, so actually we can't give answer to your point raised by you, but hopefully President Kumaratunga should give the answer.
Well, I hope you understand.
Okay, so thank you very much for your participation for the session, and I hope you get very important point from the history of Sri Lanka and from original voice from a wartime hero, Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.